What's up everybody, I hope you're well. I've been really looking forward to make this video and it's been highly requested by some of you in the comment section. If you don't know what this is going to be about, if you're new to the channel, I recently had a recording session with the live orchestra and quite a few of you asked me to possibly make a comparison between, the live recordings and my mock-up. That's what we're gonna talk about today, the MIDI for the mock-up, and the stems from the recording session, as well as the PDF scores, the conductor score and the parts are all available for download on my Patreon. Here I have the Logic session with the mockup and the live version. Live is blue and mockup is orange. And I haven't listened to the mockup in quite a while. I can't quite remember how it sounds like, but I remember at the time of making this a couple of months ago, trying to do the best I could just so that I could make this video later on. So let's have a listen to what we have. Let's start with the introduction of the piece. So here's the mock-up. And here's the live version. Obviously, the live version is always going to be better than the mock-up, and there's no way around it. But I think in the mock-up there's still plenty of good, and generally speaking, for this whole piece, probably the mock-up is going to represent a little bit more of what my original intention was when I wrote the piece, because obviously you have a much bigger degree of control in what you do, particularly when it comes to dynamics and stuff like this. And the mock-up, particularly for this part, sounds a little bit softer. You can clearly hear it in some of the dynamics here in those two swells that we had at the end of the sections. While the live version, the swells are quite big. And also the last stab that we have at the end is very different, it's big on the mock-up, while on the live version it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit more subtle. Yeah, but this is basically just an introduction, and sample libraries and virtual instruments tend to do this kind of stuff very well. So let's move on to more interesting stuff. Now let's have a listen to the live orchestra. So there are things I like about both of them, actually. What I like about the live version is the blur that we have in the violins, those, measured tremolo they play. While in the mock-up, it's a much more, crispier kind of sound. It's much more defined. Kind of gets lost as soon as the French horns start to play, while with the live version it kind of remains prominent throughout the entire section. But what I still prefer from the mockup is the French horns, actually. While with the live version I wasn't quite 100% satisfied, you know, with the sound I was getting. So let's have a listen to that. So it sounds a lot smaller. And of course, I could have asked them to play, you know, one dynamic mark up, but that wasn't really the point, you know, like this part wasn't supposed to be, you know, screaming on top of everything. And this is just the sound that you get with 4 French horns playing together in unison. Maybe if I had 6 French horns or 8 French horns, I would have gotten closer to what I have, what I have in the mockup. And quite interesting is this little swell that we have at the end. So let's have a listen to that part again. While with the live orchestra sounds like this. So we're getting quite a bit less of the trumpets, even if I, you know, originally annotated that part as a forte, more like we have in the mockup. You know, I wanted to have that brassy kind of sound, but the players decided to just, you know, back off a little bit. Real musicians will try to balance with each other, and making a live recording like this with many musicians involved is a collaboration, you know, and sometimes you kind of have to trust their instinct. So let's carry on with the following part of the piece. And now the live version. I think this last section shows some of the things that you can sort of approximate with your sample libraries, but it doesn't quite sound, you know, the way it's meant to be. And I'm talking about this specific doubling that we have at the beginning, you know, of the section with violin, flute, and oboe, and maybe clarinet as well. I can't quite remember. All playing in unison, you know. And it has a very specific kind of sound in the live recording. And I think it has something to do with, you know, natural harmonics and how the room resonates when you have all these instruments playing together. And that obviously doesn't quite sound the same in the mockup. So it sounds like 3 different instruments playing the same part. While if we have a listen to the live recording, you'll see that these different instruments kind of blend together and make a unique sound. And you'll see these kinds of things later on as well when we have the violins playing in octaves. So that was the mock-up. Let's have a listen to the live version. So it's a very gripping kind of sound. It has a bite, while the mock-up kind of lacks that, you know, extra layer of, I wouldn't even know how to describe it. Like, these instruments, they don't really blend together the same way they would with a real orchestra. So let's carry on with the following section. Here's the mock-up again. And now the live version. I think there isn't too much to say about this specific kind of section. Probably the only important remark is the fact that the orchestration is slightly different in the mock-up, where we have some tremolo here in the strings. While for the live version, we have trios outlining some kind of minor 7 flat 5 chord. I think that's how it sounds like. So let's carry on with the following part. Here's the mock-up. Okay, very good. And now the live version. My very first reaction when listening to this being played live was, I mean, like any of the solo parts, like the solo oboe that we have over here, when they're exposed like that, you know, the mock-up is not gonna be very forgiving, you know. And I think I did a decent enough job in the mock-up, but the live version is just so much better, you know. It's night and day difference. The samples are good, but it's a kind of flat, you know, performance, just like you would expect. This is wonderful and expressive, and it's something that you cannot really replicate with samples. We'll have a few more sections like this throughout the piece with solo instruments, and they all show the same, you know. So solo instruments on live version, yes. Mock-up, not so much. So let's carry on. So the very first obvious thing is probably the fact that, you know, the mock-up sound big. I think it sounds good, but again, the blends are not the same, you know. It doesn't sound like an orchestra playing together. It just sounds like a bunch of instruments single tracked and then stitched together to make an arrangement. I think a more fair comparison would probably be to record each single player you know, separately, and then put them together later and see how they sound like. And one more thing before we move on, let's have a listen to the French horns taking the melody. This is the mock-up. Again, that line still sounds kind of flat, doesn't have much articulation, while in the live version sounds like this. Very different. It feels very different. It doesn't feel like a legato line on top of, you know, whatever is happening underneath. It feels like, you know, these instruments are playing the right articulations and they're interpreting the music the way it's meant to be. So let's carry on with the following section. Honestly, I think these two sections kind of sound similar, you know. The violins in the live version are much more well defined, I think, than in the mock-up. But what I like about the mock-up is the brass, actually. While in the live version, they kind of get lost. So they tend to blend more with the low strings as opposed to sticking out as a different instrument. Let's carry on with the following section. mean, the difference is quite shocking. And again, I don't think that the mockup is bad. And also here's something a little bit more subtle. Have a listen to how the strings take over, you know, as soon as the oboe drops out. So that was the mockup. It's fairly subtle. That's just beautiful how they did that, you know. And this only comes down to how, you know, real musicians interpret what's written on the page, you know, because it's literally the same orchestration, not much changed. And just you know, having that little bit of a swell going into this different section is just wonderful. So let's carry on. Something I just love about this, I mean, the section overall sounds very similar, but something I just love about this is how some of the internal voices in the chords are kind of sticking out. See if you can hear this line on the viola. That's just incredible. So let's carry on. And I promise the second part of the piece is going to be more interesting than the first, because I remember having had a hard time to let go of what my original vision for the music was. I kept asking the conductor to, you know, do more takes on this and just, you know, basically to try to get close to what I originally had in mind in terms of dynamics more than anything else, actually. And I was never like 100% satisfied. So let's have a listen to this. Here's the mock-up. Okay, while the live version clearly has a vibe and is very well played, of course, I don't think there is enough dynamic gap between the two different halves. Because, you know, what I originally wanted was to have, you know, this kind of big build-up going into the second repetition of the theme. And in order to do that, I wanted to make the first section very quiet and then the second section very big. But what's happening in the live version is that the players are not playing quiet enough in the first half, and then they're not really going for it in the second either. And you can clearly hear it on this French horn line that I'm about to show you. Here's the mock-up. Yes, you can hear they're going for it. That's fortissimo. You can barely hear it. And we have the same problem. I mean, not that this is a problem. It's very debatable. Everything I'm saying, by the way, is just my opinion. There's no right or wrong. But yeah, we have the same kind of behavior going into, from the swell going into the following section. So here's the mock-up. And now the live version. You can see it in the waveform as well. You know, we have a big pick over there, which is just not there in the live version. Overall, in the second half of the piece, the brass were lacking. Maybe they were tired from playing all day, I don't know. So let's have a listen to what's coming after this. So two little things about this. Remember when, you know, at the beginning of the video, I said that, you know, some of the doublings don't work as well as they should in a mock-up. We have the same thing here with cellos, violas, and bassoons playing in unison, which in the mock-up kind of sounds small, while on the live version it sounds the way I meant it to sound. And of course it gets even bigger as soon as we have the French horns playing the melody in unison as well, like we do in the second half of the section. It's so big, while in the mock-up sounds like this. Everything we said before still applies about, you know, the overall expressivity and the interpretation of the lines. I mean, just like there's no comparison. And something else we could nitpick a little bit is the brass in the live version, which I'm holding back a little bit. Listen to the stabs that we have in the trombones. Yes, while in the mock-up they're very bitey. So very crispy, very well detailed. That's the way I meant it to sound. And if you have a look at the score, the way I notated this, you know, for the players, was as a forte. So I meant it to sound bitey, but they're not really going for it. But maybe that was a good call, because the second half, you know, the remaining part of the piece is gonna be pretty much all brass driven, and holding back a little bit for this section can be useful, just so that we can create a little bit more contrast later on when we need to, you know, hit it more powerfully. So let's carry on with the following section. And again, some of my comments for these last few sections are probably gonna be similar to what I said before. You know, some of the doublings here tend to, you know, work very well in a very different kind of way that they do in the mock-up. We have, you know, big, very big string section playing in octaves all together. It's a very gripping kind of bitey sound, and they blend together in a very specific kind of way, not which is not the same in the mock-up. Particularly the cellos, you can hear them sticking out a little bit in the live version. And we have something interesting in the woodwinds as well. You know, we have some blurry kind of arpeggios and glassy things on the top that you know, make this section sound magical or whatever, more Disney-like, which, you know, obviously are very difficult to recreate virtually. As you know, having fast lines and fast legatos and these kinds of stuff, you know, are not things that sample libraries do very well. So for the mock-up, I kind of put them down a little bit because they didn't sound very good, but it sounds fine once it's played live. So let's carry on with those big, you know, brass chords that we have after this. So, I mean, this might not be the huge brass bed that I originally had, and I did have a hard time to let go, to be honest. Maybe I've become accustomed to, you know, hearing brass sounding huge in movies, but that's a hyped sound. That's not what you necessarily get with a live orchestra, unless you start doing some trickery, you know, kind of blending in the samples and adding players and doing stuff like that. And to be fair, the mock-up, it is a little bit messy by comparison. It sounds like there's a lot going on, while, you know, the live version maybe sounds a little bit more classical. And something I really do miss though is those bitey kind of hits that we have on the bass trombone and the tuba as well, that work as an answer phrase to the main, brass part on trumpets and French horns. So let's have a listen to that specifically. Which in the live version is just not coming through. It's much more subtle. So that's all I have to say about this, and I'm probably going to have very similar kind of comments for the ending as well. And to be honest, I think this is all very good. What I'm missing is just a little bit of bite from the brass, particularly the trumpet, with the type of writing I do, which is based on kind of, practicing restraint. The moment I actually give up the brass, I give up the trumpet playing in the high register, I want it to be screaming. And having the brass being so quiet is not something I necessarily expected to have, but it's not bad. It's just different from what I originally envisioned. So let's play the very last section, which is probably one of my favorites. And if you thought that, the mock-up and the live actually sounded quite similar, wait for this. I mean, the difference is shocking. It's shocking. Like, the live version is just so much better than the mock-up at this specific part. And what's weird about this is that I always thought that, some of this romantic kind of writing and this long lush, string lines and stuff like this are some of the things that sample libraries tend to do the best. And that's true, they always sound quite nice, but when you compare it to the real thing, I mean, there's just like a night and day difference. And that's probably due to the fact that there are more things to take into consideration, not just the interpretation of the lines and expressivity and these kind of things that you would get with real players, but more subtle nuances such as intonation as well. Because obviously having something that is mapped to your keyboard, so equal temperament, it's going to be sounding good. But once you're doing things with the real orchestra and everybody is balancing not just the volume, but the pitch as well, making those major thirds a little bit more flat to have a grip, and so on. I mean, I don't know the mathematics or how that works specifically. It's just a very different kind of vibe. It gives you a very different kind of sound. And you can tell on those rich chords that we have at the end that, players are being careful on how to balance each single note they play. Let's have a listen to just the ending. Here's the live version. I mean, this is so cool. The last chord is actually quite spicy and it doesn't sound the same way it does in the mock-up, So that would be everything, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. And bear in mind, this is all very subjective. You might not agree with what I say, but just please try and keep it clean. I don't want any drama in the comment section. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Again, as I said at the beginning, files for both the mock-up and the live version and the scores as well are available on my Patreon. Like the video and subscribe if you're new. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye.